Game of Thrones is a great show, or most of it is. Anyway, that's the general consensus. But here's the thing about consensus. It tends to smooth over the cracks, and when you go back and rewatch Game of Thrones from the very beginning, stripped of all the hype and the shock and the cultural moment it represented, those cracks become impossible to ignore. I'm not here to tell you Game of Thrones is bad. I'm here to tell you it has a specific recurring, deeply structural problem that nobody really talks about. And once you see it, it changes how you watch the entire show. The Starks were always going to lose. Not because the show is clever, but because the show never actually lets them grow. Let's talk about Ned Stark. He's the moral anchor of the first season. The honest, honorable man in a world that has no use for honesty anymore. That's a genuinely compelling starting point. The tension of watching a good man navigate a corrupt court is the entire engine of season 1, and the show knows this. It trusts this setup completely. The problem is what the show does, or more precisely, doesn't do, with that setup. Character development at its most basic is when a person is confronted with their flaw, is forced to reckon with it, and either grows past it or is destroyed by it in a meaningful way. The keyword there is meaningful. Ned's death is shocking, it's not meaningful in terms of his arc. Because Ned never actually confronts his honor as a flaw, he never gets the chance. The one moment, the only moment, where Ned bends is when he agrees to confess to treason he didn't commit. It's framed as a sacrifice. He does it to protect his daughters. But even that isn't really Ned choosing to adapt. It's Ned being coerced. He's not becoming smarter. He's being crushed. The game kills him before he can learn how to play it. Compare this to the character the show clearly modeled him against, Tywin Lannister. Tywin understands that in this world, sentiment is a weapon that can be used against you. Every decision he makes is calculated. The contrast between him and Ned is the show's most interesting dynamic, but it's cut short the moment it starts to pay off. Ned was supposed to be the beginning of a journey. Instead, he was the whole journey, just a very short one with a sword at the end. Then we get Robb, and this is where the show's structural problem becomes almost comedic. Robb Stark is introduced as a military prodigy. He captures Jaime Lannister, the most valuable prisoner in the entire war, without losing a single major battle. The North rallies behind him. He has all the leverage. Think about what that position actually means. You have Jaime Lannister in chains. The Lannisters, people who always pay their debts, will not risk Jaime's life. That is your insurance policy. It guarantees the safety of your sisters in King's Landing more surely than any agreement or promise ever could. The moment Catelyn releases him for a verbal promise from Cersei, a woman who has shown zero reason to be trusted, the entire strategic foundation of the Stark position crumbles. And Catelyn does it unilaterally, without asking her son, the king in the north. But let's be generous and set Catelyn aside. Even before that, Robb is making decisions that a second-year politics student would wince at. He falls in love with Talissa and breaks his marriage promise to the Freys. Now here's the thing, breaking that promise isn't inherently catastrophic. Kings break promises. That's practically the job description in Westeros. The issue is what you do next. You've offended Lord Walder Frey, the man who controls every crossing over the Green Fork of the Trident. You need his bridges. So what do? You send a groveling apology. You offer him something of equal or greater value. You make him feel compensated and respected. Or, if you're Robb Stark, you send your uncle to marry Frey's daughter in your place, then continue your military campaign as if the problem is solved. It is not solved. You have handed a petty lord every reason in the world to consider himself publicly humiliated, and then you've shown him your back. The tragedy of Robb isn't that he was naive, it's that he was selectively naive. He could read a battlefield like a chessboard, he couldn't read a room. And the show never gives him a scene, not one, where someone sits him down and says, "My lord, political marriages are not about love. They are about alliances, and alliances are about what other people need to feel." That conversation never happens, so Robb never learns, and then he dies, still learning nothing. That is not a character arc. That's a character being used to demonstrate a theme. The world is cruel and unfair. without being given the agency to respond to it. Jon Snow is the most interesting case because he's given the most time and the most screen real estate. He's also the most instructive example of the show's recurring failure. Jon's decision to integrate the wildlings into the Night's Watch defense is tactically the correct call. The White Walkers are coming, every living body behind the wall matters. Jon knows this, his logic is sound. His execution, however, is staggeringly poor, and the show kind of knows this, but doesn't give Jon the tools to do better. Think about where the Night's Watchmen are coming from. These are the people who have watched brothers, sons, friends killed by wildlings for 8,000 years. The wildlings have been the enemy. You cannot simply announce they're our allies now and expect that to land. Trust is not a proclamation, it's a process. What Jon should have done, and what a politically shrewd commander would have done, is exactly what medieval lords did with conquered or annexed peoples. You integrate slowly, you create dependency, you take hostages. The sons of wildling chiefs become wards of the watch. You post wildling clans to the 17 abandoned castles along the wall. Not Castle Black. Spread them out, dilute the tension. Force cooperation at the margins before you demand it at the center. You pair wildling warriors with Night Watch veterans on patrol. You make them eat together, work together, bleed together. You don't fight 8,000 years of hatred with a speech. The mutiny isn't a tragedy, it's a consequence. And the show almost seems to understand this. The brothers who kill him aren't framed as pure villains. But Jon is never shown understanding it. He never has a scene where he acknowledges that his men's fear is legitimate, that he needs to earn trust rather than demand it, that his instincts are good, but his methods are costing him everything. He just acts, gets stabbed, gets resurrected, and moves on. Here is the pattern. See if you can spot it. Ned Stark is a good man who doesn't understand that goodness is not a survival tool in King's Landing. He dies before he can learn this. Robb Stark is a great soldier who doesn't understand that war is politics by other means, and politics is about managing people's egos, fears, and self-interest. He dies before he can learn this. Jon Snow is a principled leader who doesn't understand that principle without coalition building is just self-righteousness in armor. He dies, temporarily, before he can learn this. 3 characters, 3 iterations of the same fatal flaw. 5 seasons. The show represents this as a meditation on the cost of honor in a corrupt world. And on a first watch, that reading holds. It feels profound. The honorable keep dying, the cynical keep winning. But on a second watch, you realize the show isn't interrogating honor, it's just repeatedly pushing it. There's a difference. Interrogation implies the character has a chance to respond, to choose differently, to evolve under pressure. What Game of Thrones does instead is construct a situation where the good characters are congenitally incapable of adapting, and then it rewards you with shock for watching them die. That's not subversion, that's a pattern. And patterns by definition stop being surprising. I want to talk about the pilot episode for a moment. It opens on Night's Watch Rangers beyond the wall, fleeing from White Walkers. The Rangers are killed, except one, who makes it back south and is eventually executed for desertion. It's a tense, effective cold open. On a first watch, you're along for the ride. You don't know the rules yet. On a second watch, you realize they crossed back to the south side of the wall. Just like that. Which means, and a Reddit post articulated this well, you can apparently go around the wall by water, hugging the coast in a boat. Which means the wall, this 8,000-year-old 700-foot structure that the entire mythology of the show is built around, has a literal gap in its defenses that any fisherman with a rowboat could exploit. The show never addresses this, it just hopes you don't think about it. The Sam problem. Season 2 ends with Sam crouching behind a rock, as an army of White Walkers marches past him. The camera lingers. The lead walker looks directly at him. Sam is out of breath, frozen, clearly visible, cut to black. Season 3 begins, Sam is fine, the walkers just moved on. No explanation, no scene of Sam hiding more cleverly, or the walkers being distracted or anything. He was just fine. In isolation, this is a minor continuity glitch, but it's representative of something the show does repeatedly in its middle seasons. It uses cliffhangers as emotional currency, cashes the check, and then quietly forgets it made a promise. When you watch week to week, a year apart, you forgive this. When you binge it back to back, it's glaring. The shadow baby problem. Melisandre gives birth to a shadow assassin that kills Renly Baratheon. It passes through locked doors. It targets a specific person. It cannot be stopped by any conventional means. It is, in every practical sense, the most cost-effective weapon in the entire show. And then it is never used again. The show doesn't explain why. There's a throwaway line about it costing Stannis something, draining him, weakening him, but it's never made explicit or consistent. Why not use it on Tywin, on literally anyone who threatens Stannis? A consistent magic system doesn't need to be rigidly scientific, it just needs internal logic and consequence. The Shadow Baby is introduced as a plot device to remove Renly, and then quietly retired when it becomes inconvenient. That's not world building, that's right. Here's where I want to be careful, because I think Game of Thrones Season 1 through 4 and much of 5 is genuinely brilliant television. The performances are extraordinary, the production design is staggering, the political intrigue in King's Landing is some of the most compelling drama of the last 20 years. Tywin's conversations with Arya at Harrenhal, the Purple Wedding, the Battle of the Blackwater, the show earns its reputation. But when the spectacle fades and you watch it for a second time, when the shock of "I can't believe they killed Ned" has worn off, and you're watching with fresh eyes, you start to see the scaffolding, the Stark cycling through the same fatal flaw, the continuity gaps the first run of the Dreadling glossed over, the magic that the writers introduced and then quietly walked away from, the characters' beats that exist to move the plot, not to develop the person. In 2011, there was nothing else like this. The ambition alone was worth the price of admission, and the first watch is still genuinely an incredible experience. The mystery of winter is coming, the threat of the White Walker slowly building, the nurse across the narrow sea, all of it works on a first watch, because you're inside the mythology and you don't yet have the distance to audit it. But the second time through, you're no longer a viewer, you're a reader. And readers notice things. The Starks are a great family, honorable, loyal, tragically human. They deserved a show that let them grow. What they got instead was a show that sacrificed their development for our surprise. And the longer that show ran, 5 seasons of the same lesson nobody ever learned, the more hollow that surprise became. Game of Thrones told us winter was coming. What it never told us was that the Starks were going to spend 5 years walking toward it without a code. The irony, of course, is that the show eventually corrects itself. Sansa's arc across the season 5 through 6 is the story the show should have told all along. A Stark who's broken by the world learns its brutal rules, and comes out the other side harder and smarter. Jon's resurrection gives him a second chance, though the show arguably wastes it. Arya's entire journey is about dismantling the honor code and surviving the consequences. The Starks do learn, just very, very late, and for most of the people who love them, Ned, Robb, even early Jon, the lesson came after the funeral. Maybe that was always the point. Maybe the show wanted us to watch 5 seasons of good people failing before it let one of them succeed. If so, it's a long punishing argument to make. But hey, at least the first time we didn't see it coming.